Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the Power of Food podcast. We're your functional nutritionists, Leah Barrick and Stacy Seslowski. And we are so excited to be here with you today for our third topic, which is the gut-brain connection. So this is a huge topic, right, Stacy? There's a lot to talk about. We tried to narrow it down a bit, but we think you guys will find this super interesting and applicable to your own lives.
I love it. I'm really excited for this topic. And just like you said, this is a big one. So we're going to try to keep our information on point and stick to a good time limit.
Exactly. So, the gut brain connection, if you haven't heard of it before, it is fairly new, but not so new that it's not well established in the scientific literature. So, there is a lot of information about the connection between our brain and our thoughts and our gut and its function. And even think about, when you have butterflies in your stomach when you're nervous, or you feel nauseous when you're stressed, or you have a gut feeling about something, that is actually scientifically shown to be a thing. And so our gut is the second brain, is kind of what some people call it. And it's part of the enteric nervous system. So I don't know if you've seen this, Stacey, but I've seen a lot of people who have symptoms of GI problems like IBS or IBD. And then they also have a lot of symptoms of anxiety or depression, or they're really stressed out. And oftentimes when we see depression, stress, anxiety, we don't think about the gut being associated with that or what we're eating. But in reality, there's a lot there. So have you seen any of that with clients or with anyone you know or anything like that?
Absolutely. And just like you said, you feel it yourself. Like the second you get nervous or scared about something, I feel like you feel it in your stomach before you feel it anywhere else. So what's actually going on is that the gut microbiome, so all the bacteria that reside in our gut, they actually release those hormones that we've always heard about, like dopamine and serotonin and all of those hormones that impact our mood. A majority of them actually are released by the bacteria in our gut. So if you have an imbalance and in your gut with the bacteria that reside there, then you can absolutely impact the levels of those hormones that you have in your body, and it impacts your mood. So have you seen that?
Definitely. And, sometimes people are dealing with fatigue or brain fog or stuff like that, and they're eating a really inflammatory diet. So, we've talked about that in previous episodes, but inflammation in the gut and gut dysbiosis can all contribute to that. And there's actually been studies showing that when people are given probiotics, specific probiotics, it actually improves their stress levels, the amount of cortisol, it improves their depression levels and severity, all of that. And then the same with prebiotics. So, fiber that doesn't get fully digested in our gut microbiome, our microbes end up fermenting the fiber and making products like butyrate and all of that, which has a direct impact on inflammation. And so, when people are eating a really inflammatory diet and then they clean up their diet, they've told me they get better sleep, their anxiety is gone, they can handle their stress better, they're less depressed, all of that. They just have an overall better mindset. And so I think that speaks volumes to, the connection between what we're eating, the health of our gut, and then our brain. And not to mention things like neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. That's been shown to be greatly affected by what we're eating and the status of our gut microbiome, and if we have leaky gut, all of those things. So definitely it's so true, and so many people are dealing with depression and anxiety, and it's not really talked about that much that food can have such a big impact on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm really glad that you brought up the topic about probiotics and prebiotics. And I would say, though, that I don't recommend, and I don't know about you, I'd love to hear your take on this. I don't normally recommend that people just go out to the store and randomly choose a probiotic on the shelf and think that that is going to heal their gut. And the reason I don't recommend that is because each probiotic is a different strain of bacteria. And we don't really know until we do a really good investigation into each individual's gut. We don't really know which bacterial strain will have benefit and which maybe is not as desirable. So to start, my first recommendation is to stick with what you were saying, is feed those bacteria that already reside in your gut using prebiotics, which is the fiber that feeds the bacteria in your gut. So we've talked about this in past podcasts, but using fiber and sources of resistant starch like potatoes and beans and rice, all of those, and squash and bananas, they actually feed the bacteria that already reside in your gut. So that's my recommendation, is let's first try to improve your own bacteria before we add in a new probiotic that we are not really sure what strain you need. How do you?
Yeah, totally agree with that. I'm so glad you brought that up because people hear probiotic and it's such a buzzword, and there's so many companies out there selling probiotics, and we could do a whole podcast again about all the myths and problems associated with probiotics. But essentially, yeah, it's not going to fix your gut if you just take a probiotic. That's not what you're supposed to do. And you need to know the very specific strain of probiotic, because they all have different actions and there's so much that we don't know. Not to mention, a lot of the probiotics out there are either they're dead, so they're not actually living, so they're not actually going to do anything, or they won't make it past your stomach, or tons of other issues that really, it's probably a waste of your money the majority of the time. So unless you're working with a practitioner who knows a good brand and who knows what your problem is and what the dysbiosis you have is going on, then I would hold off on doing a probiotic supplement. Now, there's probiotic foods, so fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt, if you tolerate dairy, those kinds of things, which are great. And I do always recommend to people, unless you have something like a histamine intolerance. But again, that's a very individual matter. But yeah, definitely food first. And then prebiotics are, I think, in 5 years going to be just as, if not more popular than probiotics, once people realize how important they are. And fiber, fiber, fiber. So I know I talk about this all the time, but fiber is so important. And so when we get the fiber to actually feed the gut microbiome, then those will flourish. It'll create diversity. It'll increase numbers. And then because of that, it'll help with our brain health. And I mentioned butyrate a little bit before, but butyrate is responsible for helping with the blood-brain barrier. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the future, but butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid that has tons of benefits for metabolic health and helping with inflammation and all of that. And when we eat fiber, it ferments and turns into butyrate, which helps with the blood-brain barrier, which essentially keeps the toxins out of our brain and lets the nutrients that need to be in our brain into our brain. So totally on the same page as you, Stacy, with the probiotics. There's so much misinformation out there. And so I love telling people about that, because people don't know. And you think, okay, probiotic, awesome. Let me go buy one from the drugstore. Please save your money and go buy some fruits and vegetables instead.
Exactly. Yeah, you did a beautiful job of explaining the butyrate and the short chain fatty acids. So that was awesome. So what we wanted to get into a little bit also was the connection between the gut and the brain and the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is what is responsible for moving food in the right direction. So like when you eat, it goes down your digestive tract and gets eliminated. The vagus nerve is also responsible for putting our body into a state rest and digest, which is the where we really want our food to go, rest and digest. So the more that we stimulate the vagus nerve, the more that we are allowing for the food to go healthfully down the right tract into digestion, and allows us to have a good metabolism. So do you want to mention a couple of things that can stimulate the vagus nerve?
Definitely. So the vagus nerve, I think, is also in 5 years going to be one of those things that's talked about all the time because new research is coming out daily about it. And there are a lot of ways to stimulate it, like gargling, humming, singing, even talking. Also, slow and rhythmic diaphragmatic breathing. So, really deep breathing. All of that can help stimulate the vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve really helps with digestive functions. And even things like secreting stomach acid or producing enzymes or intestinal motility, like Stacy just mentioned, even gallbladder function, all of that. And so, if there's poor communication between the brain and the vagus nerve, that can lead to poor digestion. It can slow motility. It can contribute to things like leaky gut, brain inflammation, depression, chronic inflammation, all of that. So, studies have also shown that humans that have IBS or IBD, specifically Crohn's, they actually have reduced vagus nerve function. So that's really interesting to think about and just gives us a clue as to how important the vagus nerve actually is for proper functioning of the gastrointestinal tract and then our brain health.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what a lot of people don't realize is that if you don't have a healthy vagus nerve and motility that way, then that can cause you to gain weight because if
Hmm.
your body and metabolism is not working effectively, then you will not be able to burn calories and lose weight. So a lot of people who are struggling with weight loss, or they can't lose weight, it could be because you're always in this state of fight or flight, and you're not allowing the vagus nerve to get you into this state of rest and digest while you're eating. So
Hmm.
I often recommend that, especially people now, we're all so stressed all the time. I really try to recommend to people that prior to their meals, especially, that they kind of sit down, take some deep breaths, and figure out what works for them to get them into a more relaxed state. Maybe you have to just think about your food and be grateful for it and be more mindful when you're eating, because if your mind is constantly running on your work or something else, then your vagus nerve is not going to be stimulated and you won't have that healthy digestion and metabolism. So a good strategy is something like what I just said. Try to do some deep breathing, or before you eat, know that right now I'm going to put down whatever I'm working on. I'm going to try to clear my head from whatever stress I'm dealing with, and I'm going to focus on eating. And you're literally triggering your vagus nerve and telling it, this is a time to rest and digest, so that you can, metabolize your food and hopefully have a better chance of maintaining a healthy weight.
Totally. Yeah, really well said. And I love that you brought up, doing some deep breaths before eating, getting into the rest and digest stage. Because even so, if we're stressed when we're eating, we're not going to digest the food. Even it could be the healthiest meal. You're not going to properly digest it. You're not going to absorb all those vitamins and minerals. And then your body's still going to be craving those vitamins and minerals. So you might end up eating more, or you might end up having cravings for unhealthy foods, all of that. So it really affects everything. And the more we can eat in that relaxed, calming state, which our society is definitely not set up for, with fast food and eating in the car and being stressed and watching television and all the life stressors just piling on, it can seem like the last thing you want to do, but it really is an integral part of eating, just like including fruits and vegetables. Think of it as one of those pillars to good health.
Yeah, exactly. So as we move along, so we talked about the gut-brain connection and the microbiome that is releasing those hormones that keep our mood stabilized. Then we talked a little bit about the vagus nerve, which is the connection between the brain and the stomach and the gut, and it's what tells our body to rest and digest. And the next topic that we wanted to go over was leaky gut and leaky brain. So you said leaky gut a couple of times just to describe kind of a little bit more what we're talking about, because just so you know, our gut and our brain actually are both surrounded by something that's almost like cheesecloth. That's always my analogy. And so if you think about cheesecloth and all of the different like holes in the cloth, that's sort of that protection, that protective layer between our gut and our body and our brain and our body. And if you think about how easily that cheesecloth can have bigger and bigger holes. And the bigger those holes are, the more likely it is that food, instead of being digested carefully and safely down our digestive tract, undigested food can escape from those bigger holes into your blood. And that's what causes inflammation, because the undigested food does not belong in the blood. And the brain has the same exact type of barrier. So the more inflammation that escapes the gut into your blood, then that can actually also get into your brain. So that's really why people with autism or people with Alzheimer's disease, they have that connection between a leaky gut and then also a leaky brain. How do you
Yeah.
think about that topic?
Same thing. Yeah. So we always think about leaky gut. That's pretty well known nowadays, but I don't think a lot of people are familiar with the concept of leaky brain. And so, yeah, our brain, like you said, has that same epithelial lining, and that keeps out toxins, that keeps out pathogens, it keeps out things that would cause inflammation. It lets in the good things, like we mentioned, and yet that can become leaky. And a lot of times that becomes leaky in the same way or by the same mechanisms that our gut becomes leaky. So a lot of the things that can contribute to leaky gut also contribute to leaky brain. So poor gut health, dysbiosis, an unhealthy diet, food intolerances or sensitivities, even toxins and infections can lead to that. And also gluten. So gluten is highly debated, and it's pretty well known that gluten has been shown to increase zonulin, which weakens those tight junctions. So causes leaky gut in the epithelium of the gut, but also it's been shown to do the same in the brain. So in the brain, blood-brain barrier. So gluten, whether you have celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity or not, it's definitely one of those food sources of leaky gut and leaky brain that you should take into consideration, especially if you're dealing with depression or anxiety, or you're at risk for Alzheimer's or any of that, or autoimmune disease or any other mental health condition. You really want to think about what you're doing in your day to day and what you're consuming that might be contributing to not only leaky gut, but also leaky brain. And so, like you mentioned with autism, there's a lot of different signs and symptoms of leaky brain. So ADD, even ADHD, brain fog, fatigue, headaches, memory loss, all of these, cognitive decline. And so this is a huge topic, and it's so important to address, but really is getting to the root cause. So if we have leaky gut and we have leaky brain, fixing the gut first is critical. And then, you'll hopefully get alleviation with some of your other signs and symptoms and help heal your leaky brain as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you brought up the topic of gluten, because when people experience like headaches or joint
Mhm.
pain, or you don't really connect. Well, this could be because I'm eating too much gluten, and there is a little bit of a leaky gut, and the gluten is escaping and then causing inflammation and causing joint pain or headaches or mood changes. People don't really connect those things. Oftentimes they just take, an over-the-counter like Tylenol or ibuprofen or something like that, and just think it's normal. And these things are not necessarily normal. Anytime, and we've said this before, I think, anytime our body is giving us these signs and symptoms, there is something to investigate and not just cover it up with an over-the-counter medicine, a pharmaceutical agent or something. It's really time to investigate. Well, maybe try eliminating gluten. Dairy is another one that a lot of people do have sensitivities to and can escape the gut. So it's time to maybe try eliminating some of those foods and adding in the foods that we talked about before, the high fiber, resistant starch, fruits and vegetables. So doing that combination is a really good start to try to investigate and solve why you are experiencing certain symptoms that are uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to bounce off what you were saying with the ibuprofen and all of that, when people take that for, pain, either a headache or joint pain, it's just exacerbating the issue and it's causing gut inflammation in and of itself. And so, it's not going to help you prevent those in the future. You really need to dive deep and work with someone to figure out, your food sensitivities and what diet works best for you. And it's going to look different for everyone. But as we talked about with previous podcasts, there are certain things that cause inflammation in pretty much everyone. So addressing those issues first and then seeing if your brain fog or your headaches or whatever it is that you're dealing with helps get better after you change up your diet and lifestyle.
Exactly.
Speaking of which,
yes, perfect segue into some of our recommendations for food and lifestyle to, number one, heal the gut, and then secondly, that will heal the brain. So we've already mentioned some really good ideas like increasing fiber and prebiotics and the probiotics that exist in fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi and yogurt if you can tolerate dairy. So increasing those things and also experimenting with eliminating things like gluten and dairy. So that's a good start. What are some additional ones that you would recommend?
So in terms of brain health, I always focus on healthy fats. So our brain is primarily fat, so at least 60% fat. And so if we're thinking about brain health, gut health, all of that, we really need to increase our intake of healthy fats, primarily omega-3 fats. So that's coming from things like salmon, anchovies, sardines, herring, mackerel are all great sources. Also grass-fed, grass-finished beef has omega-3s. And then there's also vegetarian sources from nuts and seeds like chia and hemp and flax. But again, we talked about this last time, the conversion isn't that great. So you're not getting as many omega-3s from plant sources as you are from animal sources. But other healthy fats are avocado, olive oil. Interestingly, the Mediterranean diet is associated with a lower rate of Alzheimer's. So a lot of that could be because olive oil is such an integral part of that diet. So getting in those healthy fats is crucial. And then things like walnuts, I always laugh because walnuts are shaped like a brain. And so I think it's just nature's way of telling us to eat them for brain health.
Yeah.
But everything that affects our gut health affects our brain health. And so all of those foods, and as you mentioned, the fiber, the fermented foods, all of that is so important. And then also just getting in all the vitamins and minerals we need for gut healing. So our fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, K, all of that is really critical. And then things like dark leafy greens, which might not be talked about as much when we talk about brain health and gut health, but those are packed with vitamins and minerals. And so they also a lot of times have nitrates in them. And so nitrates actually dilate our blood vessels, and that helps us get blood flow to our brain, to our gut, so that we can do the healing process. So all of those are really great to include in the diet. And then also in terms of brain health, I like to think about protein and amino acids, especially things like tryptophan, which is the amino acid precursor to serotonin, so the feel-good hormone. So it's really important that we have enough foods with that. So that's things like turkey and eggs. And then again, if you tolerate dairy, it is in cheese and that kind of thing as well. So there's so much you can do. There's also tons of supplements as well, but that's a very individual thing. And I would highly recommend you work with a practitioner for that. A lot of people are taking supplements and they don't know why, or they come from a bad source, or it's actually doing the opposite of what they want it to be doing. So you definitely want a professional to help you out with that. But is there anything you wanted to add to that, Stacy, in terms of foods to add in or anything like that?
That was such a good list. As I was like thinking the things that I would recommend, we like took one by one.
Just check them off.
My job. So yeah, I mean, all the DHA is the omega-3 fatty acid. That's like number one. I always think brain and anytime I think brain, I think DHA. So that's what you said. You get from fatty fish.
Do you have your clients supplement with that, or do you try to get a food first for them?
I do try to go food first because fish oil could possibly cause oxidation or oxidative stress. And there are lab tests that you can take to figure out if your body is oxidizing fat in a healthy way or in a not so healthy way. And so that is something I recommend, or a supplement is something I recommend after I see that blood work. So I wouldn't say run out and get a supplement. I would say if you are curious about this, you might want to see a health professional and get that blood work done so that you know if your body can healthfully use fat in the right way, use at least the supplement in the right way. You don't have to worry too much when you're getting it from food because you're not getting it at such a highly concentrated dose. So that's what I do there. Some other things, like you said, all the vitamins, vitamin D is especially helpful. So is choline. Choline is something that you get from the yolk of an egg or from organ meats. That's another nutrient that I would highly recommend focusing a little bit on for your brain. And then also just like thinking about all the things that we've talked about in the weeks past that actually cause inflammation. So all the processed foods, or like if you have a high sugar snack before you go to bed, or chips and some alcohol, or, all those processed foods, high sugar foods, they do the opposite of what we're trying to do here. So trying to make sure you're not doing those things that cause inflammation, and then also making sure you're adding in the things that help with reducing inflammation that we all just mentioned right now. So those are all the recommendations that I would have. And then,
that's awesome. Yeah. I just wanted to say I'm so glad you mentioned choline, because that is such a huge one for brain health. And especially when people were on the low fat train, and you're eating the egg white and throwing out the egg yolk, and all of the nutrition is in the yolk. We need the choline, and liver, organ meats, great sources of that as well. So that is really important for brain health.
Yeah. And then I'm sure that you were going to get into this, but just sleep. I feel like sleep is the time. I've always thought of this analogy that when you're sleeping, it's literally like you have a power washer that is like clearing out any damage that's in your brain and letting you start fresh the next day. So getting a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night, like high quality sleep where you just know you wake up, you feel so refreshed. It's not always easy to get that. I wonder, sometimes you wonder why, like your baby, it's such a natural thing to just sleep so well. And then as we get older and older, the ability to get 7.5 to 8 hours of quality sleep seems to get more and more difficult. Do you feel that way?
Absolutely. And, even if you're having trouble falling asleep, it can be one of the most frustrating things. But even more so, once you fall asleep and you wake up at 3 in the morning and you can't fall back asleep, that can be devastating pretty much for the next day, right? Because we all know how horrible we feel when we have a poor night's sleep, and how hard it is to concentrate, and how hard it is to do anything, and how you are more stressed out and you're more anxious and you're just in a bad mood. And so sleep is imperative for everything. But I loved your analogy of the car wash, just cleaning everything out and getting rid of all the toxins that have accumulated in your brain. And, just it's like a restart button for your brain. So you should wake up feeling refreshed. If you don't, you probably have some inflammation or something else going on. But yes, sleep is crucial. Number one thing, even arguably more so than diet, because it just has a direct impact on everything. So yeah, definitely sleep. And then also kind of along with that, decreasing stress for brain health. That's huge as well. Definitely easier said than done. Finding out what works best for you is great, whether it's meditation, which we've talked about in the past episodes, or exercise, or getting out in nature, whatever it is that helps you decrease stress. And then we're not going to talk about it a ton just for time's sake, but detoxing from pesticides and heavy metals and all of that, which can directly impact brain health, is really critical. And avoiding those toxins in the first place is super important, as is exercise. I mentioned nitrates, which increases blood flow to your brain. Exercise does the same thing. We want blood flowing throughout our body. And also, interestingly, inversions. So like in yoga, doing headstands or shoulder stands, or even just putting your feet up the wall, that can really help increase brain flow to your brain. So I always recommend that to clients as well. If you're dealing with brain issues, or honestly, anyone, we all need it. We're all standing up or sitting upright all the time. So the blood is flowing down. So just to help our bodies a little bit and take some of the pressure off and increase that flow of blood and lymph, it's really helpful also.
Yeah, great recommendations. The very last one I would just mention is that having a healthy, balanced blood glucose level is also really important. And the way you can try to help that along is, number one, lowering your sugar intake, but exercise, like you said, and also trying as much as we can to not snack and keeping your meals about 3.5 to 4 hours apart, not snacking in between, and then getting a good 10 to 12 hours in the nighttime without eating. So finishing your meals a little earlier in the evening and not eating until like good, when you wake up, having that good 10 to 12 hours at night is also a really helpful way to maintain a good blood sugar. And that's also really important for your brain health.
Totally. Yeah. Such a good point, and so important to keep in mind. And again, just like with the low fat diet, for a while, snacking every 3 to 4 hours was considered imperative for good health. And now research is showing that that's not necessarily the case. So such a good point, and definitely something to keep in mind. And blood sugar balance is so crucial for everything. So I'm glad you brought that up as well.
Yeah. So with that, I think we did good with our time. So just to remind you guys, we have here today Leah Grace Barrick, and you can check out when you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Grace Functional Nutrition, and my website is www.gracefunctionalnutrition.com. And I am currently accepting new clients for one-on-one nutrition counseling, so definitely reach out if that's something that interests you.
Awesome. And I am Stacy Seslowski. My website is www.healfromfood.com. You can find me at social media at Heal From Food. And I as well am seeing new clients. So please email me if you'd like, Stacy, Stacy, at healfromfood.com. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Stacy.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.